In the forgotten hollows of the Appalachians, where ancient trees guard long-buried secrets, Sarah Matthews was lost. 8 months pregnant, and miles from the nearest trail, a cold dread coiled in her gut as storm clouds bruised the sky. When the dilapidated cabin appeared through the mist, it felt like salvation, until the barrel of a shotgun greeted her at the door. Behind it was Marcus Holt, a man who hadn't spoken to another soul in 7 years. His useless legs were hidden beneath a threadbare blanket, his eyes sharp and wary. Two strangers, each vulnerable in their own way, bound by circumstance and the encroaching dark. What happens when survival depends on trusting the one person you fear the most? The sun had barely crested the ridge when Sarah Matthews set out on the trail that morning. Her pack lighter than usual, but still balanced awkwardly against her swollen belly. At 35, she had spent half her life capturing the wild through a camera lens, but this expedition was different. Her editor had called her reckless when she pitched one last assignment before maternity leave. 8 months pregnant in the Appalachian wilderness. No way, he'd said. But Sarah had never been one to heed warnings. Back in her Charlotte apartment, a signed stack of divorce papers sat on the coffee table. The ring on her finger caught the morning light as she adjusted her pack's straps. She still wore it, not out of sentiment, but because her fingers were too swollen to comfortably remove it. Like so much else in her life, it had become a burden she'd simply grown used to carrying. "We just want different things," Michael had said 6 months ago, his gaze carefully avoiding her growing belly. The pregnancy had been unexpected, a final, flickering spark in a marriage that had already grown cold. He'd agreed to child support, but made it clear he wasn't ready for fatherhood. Sarah had nodded, swallowed the disappointment, and started planning this trip the very next day. The forest welcomed her with familiar sounds, the chatter of chickadees in the canopy, the rustle of leaves underfoot. Sarah had always found a clarifying peace in wild places, far from the expectations and judgments of others. Here, it didn't matter that she was about to become a single mother at 35, or that her career photographing endangered species might never recover from the break she'd have to take. "It's just you and me, little one," she whispered, resting a hand on her stomach as she navigated a steep section of the trail. The baby kicked in response, a flutter that still startled her, even after months of these silent conversations. Her mother had pleaded with her to reconsider the trip. "What if something happens?" she'd asked, the worry lines around her eyes deepening. Sarah had shown her the satellite phone, the detailed itinerary, the emergency supplies. "I've been doing this for 15 years, she'd reminded her mother. "This is who I am." But as the sky bled from blue to a bruised gray, and the first drops of rain began to fall, Sarah felt the first prickle of doubt. The trail markers had grown faint over the last mile, and her GPS was glitching. She checked her paper map, tracing her planned route with a finger. According to it, she should have reached the summit overlook by now. The rain intensified, and Sarah quickened her pace, scanning for an overhang or a dense grove of trees. Her breath came in ragged bursts as she pushed up the incline. The baby shifted uncomfortably, pressing against her diaphragm. "Just a little further," she promised, though she wasn't sure who she was trying to reassure. The first clap of thunder made her flinch. Summer storms in these mountains could form with terrifying speed. She needed to find shelter, now. Abandoning the faint trail, Sarah pushed into a denser section of forest where the tree canopy might offer some protection. That's when she saw it. a dark shape through the curtain of rain and fog. A structure of some kind, nestled against the mountainside. The relief that washed over her was immediate and overwhelming. She hadn't seen any cabins marked on her map, but Forest Service shelters weren't always documented. A flash of lightning briefly illuminated the clearing ahead. The cabin was small, its wood weathered gray by years of mountain seasons. No smoke rose from the stone chimney. No light shone from the single visible window. It looked abandoned, perhaps one of the old hunting shacks that dotted these remote areas. Sarah approached cautiously, years of wilderness experience reminding her that derelict structures could be home to wild animals seeking the same shelter she was. The porch steps groaned under her weight. She knocked on the door, more out of habit than any expectation of a reply. When none came, she tried the handle. Locked. The rain was a deluge now, thunder booming directly overhead. She circled around to the window, cupping her hands against the glass to peer inside. The interior was dark, but she could make out the shapes of furniture. It wasn't abandoned then, at least not for long. She returned to the front door, pounding harder this time. "Hello, is anyone there? I need shelter from the storm." The sudden sound of movement from within froze her in place. The door creaked open just a crack, and Sarah found herself staring down the cold, dark barrel of a shotgun. Her hands shot up instinctively, her map fluttering to the wet porch boards. Beyond the gun, she saw the man holding it. A face, bearded and weathered, with eyes that were sharp and deeply suspicious. "I'm just looking for shelter," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "Storm will turn you around. Get going." His voice was gravelly, as if it had forgotten how to speak. A crack of thunder punctuated his command, and rain cascaded in a sheet from the porch roof. Sarah held her ground, one hand protectively over her stomach. "I can't. Please. I'm 8 months pregnant. I got lost on the Ridgeline Trail. I just need a dry place until the storm passes." Something flickered across the man's face. Doubt, maybe, or calculation. The shotgun lowered slightly, and for the first time Sarah noticed he was sitting in a wheelchair, a simple, sturdy one, custom built for the rustic cabin. "Nobody comes up here," he said, suspicion lacing his tone. "I didn't know anyone lived here. It's not on any of my maps." "That's the point." He watched her for a long moment, then glanced past her at the worsening storm. A flash of lightning lit the clearing, followed immediately by a deafening roar of thunder. "You won't make it out in this. Not in your condition." He backed the chair away slightly, the shotgun now resting across his lap, but still well within reach. "One night. You're gone at first light." Relief flooded through Sarah as she stepped inside. The cabin was warmer than she'd expected, a small fire glowing in a cast iron wood stove. It was a single room, meticulously organized, with everything in reach of a seated person. A cot against one wall, a small kitchen area, shelves filled with books, jars, and tools. "Thank you," she said, shrugging off her wet pack. He didn't reply, wheeling himself to the stove to add another log. The shotgun never left his lap. "I'm Sarah. Sarah Matthews," she offered, but he didn't ask. He gestured with his chin toward her soaked clothes. "You need to get dry. Blanket on that shelf." Sarah grabbed the coarse wool blanket. "And you are?" The silence stretched so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Marcus," he said finally. "Marcus Holt." "How long have you lived here, Marcus?" Too many questions. The finality in his tone was unmistakable. "Water in that pot. Food in that cupboard. Help yourself, don't touch anything else. Sarah changed behind a makeshift privacy screen fashioned from an old topographical map. When she emerged, Marcus was by the window, staring out at the storm, his back to her. Radio says this front is settling in, he said without turning. 2, maybe 3 days. Sarah's heart sank. I can't stay that long. I need to get back to the trail. My satellite phone. It won't get a signal in these conditions. He turned to face her then. No signal gets in or out during storms like this. We're in a hollow. You're stuck here. Same as me. Sarah sank onto the edge of a chair, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. The baby kicked, hard, perhaps responding to her stress. Marcus watched her, his expression guarded. How far along are you? 8 months, almost 9. He gave a curt nod, then wheeled himself to a cabinet and retrieved a medical kit. It was a professional-grade trauma kit, startlingly out of place in the rustic setting. Any complications with the pregnancy? The question took her by surprise. No. Healthy so far. Why? Because we're a 3-day hike from the nearest hospital, and I need to know what I'm dealing with. He set the kit on the table with a thud. When were you due back from this hike? Tomorrow evening. The reality of her situation hit her with full force. No one will even start looking for me for at least 2 days after that. Smart planning, he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. A flare of anger cut through her fear. I've been hiking these mountains for 15 years. You're not 8 months pregnant, he cut in. You don't know anything about me. I know you're in my cabin. His eyes met hers, direct and unflinching for the first time. And I know you're in trouble. The statement hung in the air between them. Outside, the storm raged, the rain a relentless drumbeat on the metal roof. Sarah felt a tremor of something deeper than her initial fear, the unsettling awareness that her life now depended on the goodwill of this stranger. Marcus returned the shotgun to a rack on the wall, though still within his reach. The gesture did not escape Sarah, a small offering of trust, or at least a reduction of the immediate threat. Get some rest, he said, wheeling himself toward the cot. Tomorrow won't be any easier. Sarah watched him transfer himself from the chair to the bed with practiced efficiency. Only then did she notice the military precision in his movements, the way his eyes constantly scanned the room, the deliberate arrangement of every object. This was not just a disabled man in the woods. This was someone who had prepared for every contingency, including, apparently, an unwelcome visitor. Dawn arrived with a stubborn rain still drumming on the cabin roof. Sarah woke disoriented, stiff from sleeping in the chair. The events of the previous night came rushing back as she saw Marcus, already awake, working silently at a small desk near the window. His hands moved with surprising delicacy over a piece of wood. A carving tool was held steady as tiny shavings fell onto a cloth spread below. The morning light fell on a collection of wooden figures arranged on a shelf above his workstation. Birds in flight, deer in mid-leap, bears standing sentinel. Each one captured a moment of wild grace, rendered with breathtaking accuracy. You're an artist, Sarah said, her voice still thick with sleep. Marcus didn't look up. I carve. It passes the time. They're beautiful. She stood, stretching her aching back. He glanced up briefly, then nodded toward the stove. Sarah approached the shelf, examining the figures more closely. A hawk with its wings spread wide seemed ready to take flight from her palm. The wood was polished smooth, each feather distinct. Red-tailed hawk, Marcus said, his attention already back on his work. Common around here. The cabin revealed itself differently in the daylight. What had seemed random in the dim evening light now revealed itself as a space of meticulous design. Every surface served multiple functions. The walls were lined with hooks and shelves at wheelchair height. Tools hung in careful arrangements. A system of ropes and pulleys near the wood stove allowed Marcus to handle heavy logs without standing. A bookshelf dominated one wall, filled not with novels but with medical textbooks, wilderness survival guides, and volumes on mechanical engineering and carpentry. A row of hand-bound leather journals stood in a neat line. "Coffee's on the stove," Marcus said, breaking her inspection. "Help yourself." Sarah poured a cup, savoring the rich aroma. "How long did it take you to adapt this place?" Marcus continued carving, seemingly lost in the delicate curve of what looked to be an owl's wing. 3 years to get it right. Started with the basics. Widened the doors, lowered the counters, built the ramps. The rest came later. "You did all this yourself?" His hands stilled for a moment. "Had to." Sarah sipped her coffee, letting the silence stretch. Outside, a pair of wrens chattered on the windowsill, unbothered by the rain. "Gravity-fed water systems from the spring on the ridge," Marcus continued, as if the conversation had never paused. "Solar panels for minimal electricity, wood stove for heat and cooking. Root cellars beneath the floorboards for food storage." He pointed to a metal ring set flush with the floor that Sarah hadn't noticed before. "Everything I need is right here." "What about supplies you can't make?" "Medicine, tools." A faint smile touched his lips. "Twice a year, I radio a list to a friend who drops supply AUS at the logging road 5 miles from here. I haul them back myself." He nodded toward a modified all-terrain cart in the corner. "The deer trails are wide enough if you know the route." Sarah's gaze returned to the wooden figures. Among them was a delicately carved cabin, a perfect miniature of the one they were in, complete with tiny roof shingles and a wraparound porch. "Marcus, how long have you lived in this cabin?" 7 years and 2 months. The precision of his answer caught her off guard. "And before that?" The carving tool stilled. "Another life." Sarah recognized the boundary and didn't push. She moved to the window, watching the rain cascade in a sheet from the roof's edge. The clearing around the cabin was larger than she had realized, encompassing a small garden protected by a deer-proof fence. Beyond it, a dense forest consumed the mountainside. "Your trail is that way," Marcus told her, pointing northwest. "When the rain lets up, follow the creek for about 3 miles. It'll meet up with the marked path." "You seem pretty sure I'll be able to leave soon." "The barometer's rising. The storm will pass by noon." He set the carving aside, revealing a half-finished barn owl. "You should be able to make it back to the ranger station before dark." "Thank you," Sarah said, turning from the window, "for letting me stay." "You didn't have to do that." Marcus looked directly at her, his expression unreadable. "No, I didn't." He went to a cabinet and opened it, revealing a shortwave radio, far more sophisticated than Sarah had expected. "We should check conditions before you head out." He adjusted the knobs with practiced efficiency. The radio hissed with static. Marcus frowned, cycling through the frequencies. "This isn't right." Sarah moved closer. "What's wrong?" "The emergency channels are always manned." He tried another frequency, more static. "Could be the storm, but—" His expression darkened. "Something else is going on." He kept turning the dial, his movements becoming more deliberate. Something's jamming the signal. It could be atmospheric or... Or what? Sarah asked. Before he could answer, a sharp pain seized her abdomen. She gasped, grabbing the table for support. Marcus's attention shifted instantly. How far apart are they? Are what? Sarah straightened slowly as the pain subsided. The contractions. How frequent? That was the first one. It's probably just Braxton Hicks. False labor. I've had them before. Marcus went to a trunk at the foot of his bed and pulled out a battered medical kit. The case was military grade, with faded stenciled lettering. He opened it, revealing an organized array of supplies that went far beyond basic first aid. Sit down, he instructed, pulling out a stethoscope and a blood pressure cuff. I'm fine, Sarah protested. It's normal at this stage. Humor me. His tone left no room for argument. Sarah sat, watching as he pulled on a pair of latex gloves with practiced efficiency. You seem to know what you're doing. First, your blood pressure, he said, ignoring her observation. He wrapped the cuff around her arm, listening intently through the stethoscope. 130/85, higher than ideal. I'm stressed, trapped in a storm, and stranded with a stranger who pointed a rifle at me. That tends to raise one's blood pressure. The corner of his mouth twitched, the ghost of a smile. Fair enough. He placed the stethoscope's bell against her belly, moving it methodically. After a moment, his expression softened. Strong heartbeat. Sarah felt a strange sense of relief at his confirmation. She's active, especially at night. Their eyes met briefly. I found out at my 20-week scan. Marcus nodded, continuing his examination. Any swelling in your hands or feet? Headaches? Visual disturbances? No. Are you a doctor? He packed the equipment away before answering. Combat medic. 2 tours. Afghanistan, among other places. He closed the kit. The contractions could be stress-induced, or they could be preterm labor. Either way, you shouldn't be hiking anywhere. Another wave of pain rolled through her abdomen, stronger this time. Sarah winced, breathing through it the way she'd learned in her birthing class. Too soon, Marcus noted, glancing at his watch. That was 15 minutes since the last one. I can't be in labor. I'm barely 36 weeks. The overhead lights flickered, then died completely. Marcus didn't seem surprised. The solar batteries can't keep up with this storm. We have backups. He moved to a cupboard and retrieved 2 oil lamps. As he lit them, the cabin filled with a warm, flickering glow. The rain hammered against the roof with renewed intensity. You're definitely not leaving today, he said, setting one lamp on the table between them. And maybe not tomorrow, given those contractions. A surge of panic tightened Sarah's chest. I need to get to a hospital if this is really happening. The roads will be flooded by now. Even if they weren't, it's a 2-hour drive to the nearest medical center. And that's assuming you had a vehicle. So we're trapped here. With me possibly going into premature labor. Not possibly. Probably. He went back to the medical kit and withdrew a small vial. Magnesium sulfate. It can slow things down. Sarah stared at him. You just happen to have preterm labor medication lying around? A hint of weary irony crossed his face. I keep a full kit for every pregnant woman who stumbles upon my secret cabin, just in case. He measured the dosage with precision. This will help relax the uterine muscles. It'll buy us some time. Sarah accepted the medicine, suddenly aware of how completely she was trusting this stranger. Were you a good medic? Marcus busied himself reorganizing the kit, avoiding her gaze. Good enough. Most of my patients survived. That's not exactly comforting. It wasn't meant to be. He finally looked up, But right now, I'm all you've got. Another contraction hit her, longer this time. When it passed, she saw Marcus watching her intently, concern clear beneath his stoic expression. 8 minutes apart, he observed. Too fast. The lamplight cast long shadows across his face, highlighting the tension in his jaw. For the first time, Sarah saw past the gruff exterior to a man calculating risks, weighing options, falling back on his training. I need you to lie down, he said, his voice taking on a clinical, detached tone. We need to monitor these properly. As Sarah moved toward the bed, the cabin's emergency lights flickered on for a moment, then went out again with a faint pop from the electrical panel. In the renewed darkness, thunder echoed through the mountains like artillery fire. Marcus's silhouette stilled, his head cocked as if listening to something beyond the storm. This time, the power's gone for good, he said softly. We're on our own now. By midnight, the contractions had slowed to irregular intervals. Sarah lay on Marcus's bed, exhausted but unable to sleep, watching him check his supplies by lamplight. He moved with the efficiency of someone accustomed to preparing for worst-case scenarios. The medicine's working, he said. Thank you. Marcus gave a short nod, his eyes still on his inventory. It's bought us time, that's all. Where did you learn to treat premature labor? He paused, then reached into his shirt and pulled out a set of dog tags that had been hidden underneath. He held them for a moment, as if weighing a decision, then spoke. 2nd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment. Special Operations Combat Medic. Did 3 tours. He gestured toward his legs. Last one was in Afghanistan, a few places that don't officially exist. What happened? Sarah asked quietly. IED. I was lucky. Others weren't. His voice was matter-of-fact. Shrapnel nicked my spinal cord at T10. Complete paraplegia. I'm sorry. Don't be, I'm not. He tucked the dog tags back inside his shirt. A VA doctor told me I'd be in a military hospital for years. I proved them wrong. Sarah shifted, wincing. How did you end up here? Marcus wheeled his chair to the window, checking the storm's progress. After rehab, they wanted to put me behind a desk, analyzing intel, pushing paper. I couldn't do it, so I just disappeared. Up here. He turned, his face half in shadow. I tried to reintegrate, applied for adaptive housing assistance through the VA, and got put on a waiting list. In the meantime, I was living in a walk-up apartment building with narrow doorways, waiting for specialist appointments that kept getting rescheduled, taking pills that numbed everything. He shook his head. That wasn't living. It was existing. Sarah thought of her own comfortable apartment in the city, with accessibility features she'd never considered significant. An elevator, wide hallways, standard-issue grab bars in the bathroom. Then I remembered this place, Marcus continued. My grandfather's old hunting cabin. Hadn't been used in decades. The family forgot about it after he died. And you came out here alone? In your condition? His eyes hardened. My condition doesn't define what I can do. I didn't mean... The first winter was the hardest. He cut in, his tone softening slightly. Had to re-engineer everything, learn new skills. But out here, I'm not disabled. I'm adapted. Sarah nodded in understanding. No one telling you what you can't do? Exactly. Something in his expression eased. Nature doesn't care if you can walk. It only cares if you're smart enough to survive. Outside, the wind howled, battering the windows with renewed fury. Marcus listened, his head tilted slightly. How long do you think this will last? Hard to say. Mountain weather is unpredictable. Could be days. Sarah rubbed her belly, the worry returning. I need to get to a hospital. That's not going to happen, he stated flatly. He wheeled back to the medical kit, methodically checking supplies. Not until the roads are clear. Best case, your labor stays suppressed. The storm passes in 48 hours, and I can get you to the logging road. And the worst case? Marcus met her gaze directly. You give birth here. The plainly spoken possibility hung in the air between them. Sarah felt a cold knot of fear form in her stomach. Could you deliver a baby, if it came to that? I've delivered babies before. In the field. Afghanistan. He hesitated. It's not ideal, but it's possible. That's not exactly comforting. It's not meant to be. It's reality. He closed the medical kit. Get some rest while you can. Sarah tried to imagine giving birth in this remote cabin, with only this reserved stranger to help her. The thought was terrifying. You said you delivered babies before. In Afghanistan. Marcus was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he did, his voice was distant, lost in memory. Village outside Kandahar. A local woman. Complications. No time for a medevac. His hands were perfectly still on the wheels of his chair. The mother and the twins survived. That's incredible. The exception, not the rule. His voice hardened again. We weren't usually there to bring life into the world. We were there to stop death. Sometimes. We succeeded. He wheeled over to the stove, adding a log to keep the cabin warm through the night. The flames threw his profile into stark relief. The straight nose, the firm jaw, the watchful eyes that seemed to be constantly assessing. Try to sleep, he said again. I'll keep watch. Watch for what? Marcus glanced at the rifle propped within easy reach. Hopefully nothing, but hope is a luxury I don't afford myself much anymore. He positioned his chair near the window, a sentinel's post with a clear view of both the door and the bed where Sarah lay. In the flickering lamplight, she could see the military posture that had never left him, even years after leaving the service. Marcus, thank you for helping me. He inclined his head once, his eyes still fixed on the darkness outside. Sleep now. Dawn comes early. The morning brought no relief. The rain had given way to a thick, persistent fog that obscured the forest beyond the cabin's small clearing. Sarah woke to find Marcos already at his workbench, hunched over a damaged ham radio, a far more sophisticated device than the weather radio he'd been tinkering with before. Any luck? She asked, pushing herself up into a sitting position. Nothing but static. He twisted a knob, listening through a set of headphones. The regional emergency networks are down. That's not normal. Sarah moved to the window, pressing a hand against the cool glass. You think the storm damaged the broadcast towers? It's possible, but there are redundancies. He pulled off the headphones. Multiple systems would have to fail at once. A low rumble echoed through the valley, a deep, protracted groan that was nothing like thunder. Marcos was at the door in an instant, pulling it open to listen more closely. A wave of cold, damp air washed into the cabin. That's not the storm, he said, his voice tense. Rockslide. Southridge. The implications hit Sarah at once. The trail is gone. The only part they needed to take. He shut the door, his expression grim. Even if the rain stops today, that route is impassable now. There has to be another way out. There's a northern route, but it adds 13 kilometers of rugged terrain. He glanced meaningfully at her swollen belly. Not an option for you. Sarah paced the small cabin, a sense of confinement tightening around her. So we're trapped here. For how long? Until rescue crews can clear the slide. Could be days, more likely weeks. Weeks? Panic laced her voice. I'm 37 weeks pregnant. I can't. You have two options. Marcos cut in, his tone brutally pragmatic. You can panic, which helps no one. Or you can adapt to the situation we're in. Sarah took a deep breath, forcing herself to think rationally. You're right. I'm sorry. Marcos moved to the small kitchenette and set a kettle on the wood-burning stove. The cabin was stocked for a long isolation. Food for months, medical supplies. We'll manage. Sarah raised an eyebrow. I thought you were counting the minutes until I left. Something like amusement flickered across his face. I was. I still am. But circumstances have changed. He handed her a steaming mug. The simple gesture seemed at odds with his gruff demeanor. Thank you. She took a sip. Chamomile with honey. Of all things. Marcos acknowledged this with a slight nod and returned to the radio. Sarah watched as he methodically checked connections and adjusted settings, his focus absolute. The way of a man accustomed to solving problems alone. How did you learn about radios? Military communications training. Kept up with it after. He tapped the side of the unit. This was my link to the outside world before the satellite phone. It's still more reliable in these mountains. Sarah set down her mug. My sat phone. We could try that. He shook his head. Already did while you were sleeping. No signal. The weather system is likely too dense for the satellites to penetrate. Another distant rumble vibrated through the cabin floor. Marcos frowned, turning to check the roof supports. That one was closer. The ground is saturated. Whole hillsides could give way. Sarah felt a flutter in her belly, the baby reacting to her anxiety. She placed a hand there, trying to project a calm she didn't feel. We should prepare for the possibility that we'll be on our own for the delivery, Marcos said, watching her closely. I'd rather not think about that right now. Denial won't change reality. Better to be prepared than caught off guard. He walked to a bookshelf and pulled out a thick medical text. I've handled emergency births before, but a refresher can't hurt. The clinical way he approached the situation was both reassuring and terrifying. Sarah tried to imagine giving birth here, in this remote cabin, attended only by this taciturn stranger. Have you been completely alone up here all these years? Marcos's hands stilled on the book, for the most part. But you mentioned supplies. Someone must bring them. An old friend twice a year, leaves them down by the logging road. His expression shuddered. We have an arrangement. No questions, no complications. It sounds lonely. It's quiet, he corrected, looking up to meet her gaze. There's a difference. Suddenly, the radio crackled to life, a burst of static followed by a fragmented voice. Marcos was on it instantly, fine-tuning the frequency, leaning in to listen. Regional emergency. Multiple landslides. Roads closed. The transmission cut out again. Marco swore under his breath, working the dial. At least someone is broadcasting, Sarah said. Half a message doesn't do us much good. He kept tinkering. But it confirms what we suspected. It's bad out there. Sarah went back to the window, staring into the impenetrable mist. Somewhere beyond it was the world she knew. Hospitals with medical teams. Roads that led to safety. People who would be worrying about her absence. My mother will report me missing soon. They'll look for me. With everything that's happening, you'll be a low priority. Marcos's voice was gentle, despite the harsh truth. And they won't look here. This cabin isn't on any map. The weight of their isolation settled over Sarah like a physical presence. She pressed her hands against the window pane, the glass cold and unyielding beneath her fingers. We really are on our own, aren't we? Marcos didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice held a certainty that was strangely comforting. I've been on my own for 7 years. Believe me when I tell you, we will adapt. We will survive. Both of you. 3 days passed with no break in the weather. The fog would occasionally thin, revealing the storm's devastation. Newly exposed rock faces where the earth had slid away. Trees snapped like matchsticks. Every glimpse confirmed what the radio fragments had suggested. No one was coming anytime soon. Sarah sat by the window, idly tracing the curve of her baby bump through her sweater. Marcos worked nearby, repairing equipment damaged during a brief power surge when the solar system had momentarily reconnected. I've been thinking about names, Sarah said, breaking the companionable silence that had settled between them. Marcos looked up. Emma, if it's a girl, though at this point I'm starting to doubt the ultrasound tech. The corner of Marcos's mouth twitched, the closest she'd seen to a smile. Why's that? The way she kicks so hard, like she's training for combat. Could still be an Emma. Some of the toughest soldiers I knew were women. Sarah pulled a worn ultrasound photo from her jacket pocket and carefully unfolded it. Her, 20 weeks. Marcos took the picture, studying it with an unexpected gentleness. Healthy spine. Good head position. He handed it back. Strong profile. She'll be fine, Sarah. The use of her name, still a rarity from him, felt significant. I never told you why I'm out here alone, she said softly. Marcos went back to his work, giving her the space to continue or not. His silence was an invitation without pressure. My husband. He left 6 months ago. The words came out more easily than she'd expected. Said he wasn't ready to be a father. It wasn't what he wanted. His loss, Marcos said simply. Maybe, but in a way I get it. She tucked the photo away. This wasn't planned. We were already having trouble. The pregnancy just accelerated things. Still sounds like cowardice. Maybe. Or honesty, Sarah sighed. I came up here to prove something. To myself, to him, to everyone who told me I couldn't do this alone. Stubborn pride. And now I've put my baby at risk because of it. Marcos set down his tools, giving her his full attention. Pride isn't always a bad thing. Sometimes it's all that keeps you going. Is that what keeps you here? Pride? He considered it. At first, it was anger. About what happened? The system that failed you? My own body. He gestured toward his legs. Now it's something else. Independence. Peace. He glanced around the cabin, at the adaptations he'd made, the life he had built. Up here, My limitations are just problems to solve, not disabilities to overcome. The mountain doesn't judge. It just is. Sarah understood with a sudden clarity. You're not hiding. You're living on your own terms. Just like you. He nodded toward her belly. Taking on motherhood by yourself. Same principle. The comparison had never occurred to her. I hadn't thought of it that way. Different circumstances, same spirit. He returned to his repairs. That kid is lucky. The simple validation from this solitary, careful man, who seemed to measure every word, brought unexpected tears to her eyes. She blinked them away, embarrassed. Sorry, hormones. Nothing to apologize for. He worked in silence for a moment, then added, My mother raised me alone. My father left before I was born. She never needed him. Neither did I. The personal revelation, so rare from him, felt like a gift. Sarah took it in silently, understanding it as the comfort it was intended to be. Thank you for saying that. Outside, a patch of blue sky appeared briefly through a break in the clouds, the first in days. They both noticed it at the same time. Weather's turning, Marcos observed. Finally. Sarah felt a conflicting wave of relief and dread. The end of the storm meant decisions would have to be made about what came next. What will you do? Marcos asked, seemingly reading her mind. After, when you can leave. Go home, I guess. Get ready for her. Try to be half the parent I'm pretending I can be. You're more capable than most I've met. The certainty in his voice was startling. Coming from him, a man who had rebuilt his entire existence on sheer determination, the compliment carried weight. Sarah felt a curious warmth spread through her chest. I still don't know if I'm ready to be someone's mother. Nobody ever is. His eyes met hers. But some people rise to the occasion. You will. The simple faith in his assessment moved her deeply. This man, who trusted no one, had somehow developed a belief in her. The fifth day brought sunshine and a rising tension. The weather had cleared enough to assess the damage outside. Massive landslides had indeed obliterated sections of the trail, confirming they were still effectively trapped. Sarah's restlessness grew with each passing hour. There has to be a way down, she insisted, pacing the small cabin. What about your supply route? Washed out? Marcos went to the bookshelf, rearranging items with unnecessary precision. I checked with the binoculars this morning. So we just sit and wait? For how long? Until it's safe. His tone was clipped. Unless you want to risk delivering your baby in a mudslide halfway down the mountain. Sarah stopped pacing. Don't talk to me like I'm being irrational. I have valid concerns. I never said you didn't. He kept organizing, his back to her. But emotion doesn't change the facts. And what are the facts? That you are 37 weeks pregnant. That the trails are impassable. That we are stuck here whether we like it or not. Each statement was delivered with clinical detachment. Those are the parameters we're working with. Parameters? Sarah's frustration boiled over. This isn't one of your survival drills, Marcos. This is my life. My baby's life. He turned from the shelf to face her. Which is precisely why we are not attempting a dangerous evacuation. Their raised voices hung in the air between them. The forced proximity of the past few days had worn their patience thin. Two fiercely independent people, confined to a single room, both accustomed to solving problems on their own. Sarah stalked to the door, needing air. Marcos watched her, his eyes narrowed. Where are you going? Outside. To breathe. She threw back. Is that allowed within your parameters? He didn't take the bait, but his jaw tightened. Don't go far. I'm not an idiot. Never said you were. He turned back to the shelf. Take the whistle by the door. 3 short blasts if you need help. The simple precaution, his constant mindfulness of safety, soothed some of her anger. She grabbed the whistle without comment and stepped outside. The mountain air was crisp, scented with pine and damp earth. Sarah walked the perimeter of the clearing, staying well within sight of the cabin. Her lower back ached from days of tension and uneasy sleep. The baby shifted restlessly, as if sharing her discomfort. Near a woodpile, she noticed a small, hewn bench, weathered but sturdy, positioned to catch the morning sun. She sat, watching the clouds cast moving shadows across the valley below. Through the cabin window, she could see Marcos sitting perfectly still, a leather-bound book open in his lap. His journal, she realized. He wrote in it every night, a ritual she'd observed but never commented on. Curiosity pulled her back inside. Marcos closed the book as she entered, sliding it beneath a stack of maps. Feeling better? He asked, his voice neutral. A little. Her gaze fell on the partially hidden journal. What do you write about, if you don't mind my asking? Observations. Weather patterns, wildlife movements. He hesitated. Thoughts. 7 years of thoughts? That's a lot to write down. It helps clear the mind. Talking to yourself gets old after a while. Sarah smiled. I can imagine. She moved toward the maps, inadvertently revealing the corner of the journal. Marcus reached for it quickly, but not before she saw her own name written on the open page. You're writing about me. It wasn't a question. His expression shuddered. You're the first person I've spoken to in almost a year. It seemed worth documenting. A year? But you said your friend brings supplies. He leaves them at the drop point. We don't meet. Marcus tucked the journal away more securely. It's better this way. For who? For everyone. His tone was final, ending the conversation. Sarah sank into a chair, suddenly weary. I'm sorry for being rude earlier. This is a difficult situation, he concluded. For both of them, the acknowledgement hung in the air. Her presence had shattered a solitude he had carefully built. She nodded, watching as he wheeled himself to the stove to prepare dinner. They worked together in silence, chopping vegetables, heating water, setting out plates. The routine had developed naturally over the past few days, each finding ways to contribute without discussion. Sarah was struck by how quickly they had fallen into this rhythm. Two strangers, adapting to one another against all odds. Marcus, she said as they ate. Thank you. For the journal entry. I mean, even if it just says, annoying pregnant woman invaded my cabin, she added with a small smile. The tension between them eased a fraction. Marcus didn't return the smile, but something in his expression softened. It doesn't say that. What does it say? He looked at her for a long moment. That sometimes the mountain brings you exactly what you need, even when it isn't what you want. The words hung between them, heavy with a meaning neither is ready to explore. The snap of a twig outside the cabin woke Sarah. She sat up, disoriented in the pre-dawn darkness. Marcus was already alert, his silhouette perfectly still by the window. What is it? She whispered. He raised a hand for silence, listening intently. Another sound came, the subtle scrape of a boot on stone, too deliberate to be wildlife. Someone's out there, Marcus whispered, turning silently toward his rifle. Stay down, away from the windows. Rangers. A rescue team? Sarah suggested, hopeful. Marcus shook his head, checking the weapon with practiced efficiency. They would have announced themselves, hailed us. He positioned himself with a clear view of the door, gesturing for Sarah to move behind the wood-burning stove. She obeyed, her heart pounding, a hand covering her belly protectively. The footsteps circled the cabin, methodical, unhurried, testing. A shadow passed a window, then was gone. Marcus tracked the movement, rifle ready but not raised. It could be someone lost, Sarah whispered. Like I was. Not lost, Marcus countered, his voice low. Hunting. The word carried a sinister weight. Sarah remembered the trap they had found the day before while gathering firewood. A cruel metal snare set just beyond the clearing. Marcus had disabled it with a grim familiarity, explaining that illegal poachers sometimes worked these remote areas. It's out of season, he had told her. And this type of trap was outlawed decades ago. Whoever said it doesn't care about regulations. Now, watching his tense vigilance, she understood his concern went beyond simple poaching. The intruder completed a circuit of the cabin. The doorknob turned slowly, a gentle test. Finding it locked, the footsteps retreated toward the tree line. Marcus waited, motionless, for nearly 20 minutes. Finally, he lowered the rifle. They're gone. For now. Who would be all the way up here? Sarah asked, emerging from her hiding place. Poachers, most likely. This area has black bear, elk, worth money to the right buyers. He put the rifle away, but kept it within reach. They don't usually come this far up the ridge, though. Have you run into them before? Occasionally. His expression was unreadable in the dim light. We have an understanding. They stay away from my clearing. I don't report their activities. That doesn't sound like you, Sarah observed. Making deals with people who break the law. Marcus's jaw tightened. Survival requires pragmatism. I'm one man in a wheelchair. They're usually 3 or 4, armed, with nothing to lose. But you're not afraid of them. I didn't say that. I said I was pragmatic. He rolled to the door, checking the lock. Something had changed. They've never come this close to the cabin before. Sarah rubbed her arms, a sudden chill running through her. Maybe they're looking for shelter from the storm damage? It's possible. Marcus didn't sound convinced. But there are emergency shelters along the lower trails, much more accessible than this place. As the dawn light filtered through the windows, Marcus pulled a metal box from beneath a floorboard. Inside was a handgun, which he checked, then tucked into the small of his back at his waist. I'm going to scout the perimeter, he said. Stay inside. Door locked. You can't go out there alone. I've handled worse. His tone allowed no argument. If anyone approaches, use this. He handed her a small flare gun. It'll bring me back immediately. Before she could protest further, he was gone, maneuvering his wheelchair with remarkable agility over the rough terrain outside. Sarah watched from the window as he disappeared at the edge of the forest, following the intruder's tracks. While she waited, she busied herself checking the cabin's security as Marcus had taught her. Window latches, door hinges, potential points of entry. Near the back window, she found fresh scuff marks on the sill. Someone had tested this entry point, too. Her fingers brushed against something small and metallic wedged in the window frame. She worked it free. A brass cartridge, recently fired, still carrying the faint scent of gunpowder. Marcus returned an hour later, his expression grim. They've made camp about a mile down the ridge, he reported. 3 men. Professional gear. Not your typical poachers. Sarah showed him the cartridge. He examined it, his brow furrowing. 6.5 millimeter. Military grade. He met her eyes. These aren't just hunters bending the rules, Sarah. There's something else. What do we do? We prepare. He moved to a storage chest, unlocking it to reveal emergency supplies. And we stay vigilant. Why would they be interested in this cabin? Marcus was silent for a long moment. Because they might know who lives here, he said finally. And what I saw 5 years ago, in these mountains. The revelation hung between them. Sarah waited for him to explain, but he had already shifted into preparation mode, checking ammunition, setting up makeshift alarms around the perimeter, establishing defensive positions. 5 years ago? Sarah prompted gently. What did you see? Marcus paused, conflict clear on his face. Not now. We need to secure. His words were cut short as Sarah let out a sharp, muffled cry, doubling over. A pool of fluid spread at her feet. My water broke, she whispered, looking up at him with wide eyes. Everything changed in an instant. Marcus's attention shifted entirely to Sarah, his movements becoming swift and decisive. He went to the medical kit, grabbing clean towels and supplies, and helped her to the bed. How far apart are the contractions? I don't know. I haven't felt any strong ones yet. She stopped as a powerful wave of pressure seized her abdomen, stealing her breath. Marcus glanced at his watch. That's one. We'll time them. He worked methodically, transforming a corner of the cabin into a birthing area. Clean sheets on the bed. Medical instruments sterilizing in boiling water. Makeshift stirrups fashioned from clean rope and pillows. Every movement was efficient, with no wasted energy or panic. Sarah watched him through waves of growing discomfort. You've really done this before? Twice in Afghanistan, once in South Sudan. He positioned lanterns for the best light. Not ideal conditions, but we'll manage. Another contraction hit, harder than the first. Sarah breathed through it, using techniques from her birthing classes. Marcus noted the time. 12 minutes since the last one. Still early. First babies usually take their time. He arranged pillows to support her back. Try to rest between them. Conserve your strength. What about the men outside? Marcus's expression hardened for a moment. That was now a secondary concern. This cabin is 40 years old. It's solid construction. The approach is defensible. The clinical assessment was strangely reassuring. Sarah nodded, then flinched as another contraction began to build. 8 minutes, Marcus noted, surprised. Moving faster than expected. He went to the stove and returned with a cup of herbal tea. Raspberry leaf. Helps with labor. Sarah accepted it gratefully. You just have that lying around? It's good for a lot of medicinal purposes. A faint smile touched his lips. Though I'll admit, obstetric supplies weren't my top priority when I scouted this place. The next few hours passed in a blur of escalating contractions. Marcus transformed before Sarah's eyes, the gruff recluse replaced by a focused, competent medic. He checked her progress regularly, his clinical detachment making the intimate examinations less awkward than they might have been. 6 centimeters, he reported. Good progress. By evening, the contractions were coming every 3 minutes. Sarah gripped the edge of the bed, sweat matting her hair. I don't know if I can do this. You're already doing it. Marcus's voice was firm, an anchor in the storm of pain. Your body knows what to do. Trust it. A noise outside drew his attention to the window. Dusk had fallen, and with it came the sound of movement in the undergrowth, too deliberate for an animal. "They're back," Sarah whispered between contractions. Marcus moved quickly to the window, peering out cautiously. One man, on watch. He retrieved the rifle, positioning it nearby but out of sight of the windows. Then he was back at Sarah's side, coaching her through another contraction, as if there had been no interruption. "Breathe deep. That's it." The contractions intensified further, now only a minute apart. Sarah cried out, unable to hold back the sound. "I need to push." Marcus examined her again. "Not yet. Almost, but not yet. Breathe through the urge." The noise outside stopped abruptly. Marcus tensed, listening. "They heard you." "I can't be quiet," Sarah gasped as another contraction peaked. "Don't try." He moved to position himself between the bed and the door, within reach of both Sarah and the weapon. "Let them listen. It might even work in our favor." "How?" she managed between breaths. "Few things are more terrifying than a woman in labor," Marcus said, a ghost of a smile returning. "Even hardened men tend to keep their distance." As if in response, the footsteps outside retreated toward the tree line. Marcus nodded in satisfaction. "See? Tactical advantage." Sarah would have laughed if another contraction hadn't seized her. This one was different. An overwhelming, irresistible urge to bear down. "Marcus," she gasped. "It's time." He checked one last time, then nodded, all trace of humor gone. "You're right. 10 centimeters. On the next contraction, you push." Outside, the darkness was complete. The intruder had withdrawn, but Marcus knew they hadn't gone far. Inside, a new life was about to begin. Two forces, creation and threat, were converging on this small cabin in the middle of nowhere. "Ready?" Marcus asked, positioning himself to guide the baby's arrival. Sarah nodded, gathering her strength as the next contraction began to swell. "Push," he instructed calmly. "Bring your child into the world." The sound of shattering glass broke the concentrated intensity of the delivery. Marcus snapped his head toward the back window, where a gloved hand was now reaching through a jagged hole, fumbling for the latch. "Sarah, keep pushing," he ordered calmly, his voice betraying none of the urgency of his movements as he wheeled swiftly toward the intruder. With remarkable upper body strength, Marcus launched himself from his chair, using the momentum to seize the intruding arm and twist it, hard. The concentrated intensity of the room shattered with the sound of breaking glass. Marcus's head snapped toward the back window, where a gloved hand was now reaching through a jagged hole, fumbling for the latch. "Sarah, keep pushing," he commanded, his voice a calm anchor, even as he moved with a fluid, urgent grace. He launched himself from his chair, using the momentum to seize the intruder's arm and twist it sharply. A raw cry of pain erupted from outside as Marcus slammed the man's arm against the window frame, forcing his fingers to release a hunting knife that clattered onto the floorboards. At the same moment, Sarah screamed with another contraction, her world split between the demands of her body and the violent struggle at the window. "I'm here," Marcus called to her, his grip like a vice on the intruder as his free hand reached for the shotgun. "Keep going, you're doing great." The intruder wrenched his arm free, disappearing back through the broken window. Marcus quickly jammed a metal toolbox into the opening, then returned to Sarah's side, the shotgun now resting across his lap. "That was impressive," Sarah gasped between contractions. "Combat training," he said. "Upper body strength has its uses." He repositioned himself to help with the delivery, his gaze constantly sweeping, keeping a clear line of sight to every point of entry. Focus on pushing now. Muffled voices murmured outside. Several of them. The intruder hadn't come alone. How many? Sarah asked, her teeth clenched as the next wave of pain crested. 3, maybe 4. Marcus's voice remained steady. Don't worry about them. Hard not to, she managed, pushing with all her might. They're not getting in. His certainty was a fortress. Not while I'm here. The baby's head began to crown. I can see her, Marcus announced, his professional detachment momentarily fractured by a wave of awe. One more big push. A strong one. Sarah gathered what was left of her strength, bearing down with everything she had. Outside, footsteps circled the cabin. A cautious knock sounded at the door. Marcus, a voice called out. We know you're in there. We just want to talk. He ignored it completely, his focus entirely on the miracle unfolding before him. The shoulders are next. Now little pushes. That's it. Sarah felt a final, great release as the baby slid free into the world. For one suspended heartbeat, there was silence, and then a vigorous cry filled the small cabin. She's here, Marcus said softly, genuine emotion breaking through his controlled demeanor. A perfect baby girl. He worked quickly, wrapping the newborn in a clean cloth, expertly clamping and cutting the umbilical cord before placing her on Sarah's chest. For a brief, sacred moment, the threats outside vanished as Sarah gazed at her daughter's face for the very first time. The pounding on the door shattered the peace. Last chance, Marcus, the voice yelled. We don't want the woman or the kid. We just want you and what you know. Marcus was already at the window, peering cautiously through a gap in the curtains. 3 men, he reported, his voice low for her ears alone. Armed professional gear. The one at the door is Barton, an ex-military contractor. I recognize his voice. You know them? Not socially. His mouth set in a hard line. 5 years ago, I witnessed their operation in these mountains. Human trafficking. Moving people along remote routes to bypass border security. He moved to a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards, retrieving a small metal box. I documented everything. Dates, locations, identities. Evidence I planned to turn over when the time was right. The pounding intensified. Wood splintered as something heavy slammed against the door. They're getting in, Sarah whispered, fear warring with her exhaustion. No, they're not, Marcus said, positioning himself between her and the door, shotgun at the ready. Sarah, listen to me. Behind that bookshelf is a hidden storage space. It's big enough for you and the baby. If this goes wrong, you get in there. I'm not hiding while you... Yes, you are, he cut in, his tone leaving no room for argument. Your daughter needs you. That's your mission now. The word mission resonated with her. She saw the soldier in him then, the strategist calculating odds and priorities. His eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Then he turned back to the door, his expression hardening into a mask of combat readiness. I've been preparing for this possibility for years, he said, his voice low and certain. They think they have the advantage. They don't. Sarah shifted the newborn to one arm, her other hand reaching for the hunting knife the intruder had dropped. We'll face them together. He glanced back, surprise briefly flickering across his tactical focus. A moment of recognition passed between them. 2 survivors, wounded in different ways, now bound together by the new life cradled in her arms. The door frame cracked, groaning under the assault. Marcus gave a single, sharp nod, accepting her choice. Together, then. With the next impact, the frame shattered inward, sending splinters of wood flying across the cabin floor. Marcus fired a single warning shot through the opening. Precise, controlled, aimed to miss, but only just. A curse and the sound of scrambling followed as the attackers took temporary cover. "They'll regroup fast," he said, his eyes never leaving the doorway. "We have minutes, not hours." Sarah clutched her baby, who had grown strangely quiet, as if sensing the tension. "She needs medical care, Marcus. Proper cleaning, warmth." He looked back, his tactical assessment momentarily overridden by a paternal concern. "Is she breathing okay?" "Yes, but—" Sarah trailed off, a wave of dizziness washing over her. She looked down, alarmed to see blood soaking the bedding beneath her, far more than there should have been. Marcus followed her gaze, his expression shifting from concern to sharp alarm. "Postpartum hemorrhage," he diagnosed instantly, scrambling to her side while keeping the shotgun trained on the door. "When did this start?" "Just now." Sarah's voice sounded distant, even to her own ears. "Is it bad?" Instead of answering, he reached into his pocket, pulled out an old-fashioned pocket watch, and placed it on the bed beside her. "Time is critical. I need you to focus. You're losing blood too fast." He moved with controlled urgency to his medical kit, pulling out vials and supplies. Outside, the attackers' voices conferred in harsh whispers. "You have pills for this too?" Sarah asked, her voice weak. "Oxytocin," he said, preparing an injection with practiced hands. "It'll make your uterus contract, stop the bleeding. Standard field medical supply." Another wave of dizziness swept over her. The room began to darken at the edges. "Marcus, I don't feel right." His face came into sharp focus above her, his expression intense but unwavering. "Stay with me, Sarah. Keep your eyes open. The baby is fine. You need to be fine too. Breathe. You are my priority now." He administered the shot and began to firmly massage her abdomen. It was a painful, agonizing procedure, but necessary to stimulate the contractions. "Focus on my voice. Tell me about your daughter. What's her full name going to be?" The question momentarily calmed her. "Emma. Emma Rose Matthews." "Good name, strong." He continued his methodical work, checking his pocket watch as he monitored her bleeding. "Keep talking. Where are you taking Emma when you get home?" Zara struggled to focus. "To my mother's house, in Charlotte. She has a nursery already." "Charlotte. Good city. Good medical facilities." His voice remained a steady, calm anchor, even as his movements became more urgent. "The bleeding isn't slowing enough." From the doorway came the sound of approaching footsteps, more cautious now, but determined. "Marcus," Zara whispered, her strength fading. "Take Emma. Get her out of here. I am not leaving you." His voice was steel. "Please, she has to survive this." Marcus's hands never stopped working, applying pressure, checking her vitals. "So do you. I didn't bring you this far to lose you now." The memory of a battlefield flashed through his mind. Another life slipping through his hands. Another moment when his medical training hadn't been enough. Not again. Not here. "I need you to fight, Zara," he said, his voice low and intense. "You survived the divorce, the pregnancy alone, getting lost in these mountains, labor during an attack. Don't you dare give up now. Emma needs her mother." The attackers reached the broken door, hesitating just outside. Marcus raised his rifle with one hand, never breaking the rhythm of his medical efforts with the other. "Stay back," he shouted, his voice deathly calm. "Woman in critical condition here. You come through that door, you won't leave breathing." A moment of silence followed. Then a sneering voice. "So, she's bleeding out. A pity. Give us your evidence and maybe we'll let you take her to a hospital." Marcus didn't rise to the taunt, his focus entirely on Zara. Her pulse was rapid, thready. Her skin was cold and clammy. "Marcus," she murmured, "I'm so cold." Shock. It's to be expected. He grabbed a blanket and wrapped it tightly around her, maintaining pressure on her abdomen. The baby beside her began to let out a soft whimper. "Zara," his voice took on a new urgency. "I need you to listen. Remember what I told you about Afghanistan? The woman with twins?" She gave a weak nod. "I didn't tell you everything. She was bleeding out, just like you. No supplies, no backup." His hands continued their work as he spoke. "I used an old battlefield technique, a last resort." Zara's gaze locked on him, a flicker of focus in her eyes. "What technique?" "Adrenaline. A direct injection." His eyes bored into hers. "It's dangerous, extreme, but it saved her." "Do it," she whispered without hesitation. Marcus pulled a syringe from the med kit. "This is going to feel like lightning through your veins. Your heart will race. It will hurt. But it might buy us the time we need." Outside, the attackers began to test the broken door again. Marcus prepared the injection, his movements precise despite the chaos surrounding them. "This is going to work," he said, his voice a bastion of calm certainty. "And in a few years, you're going to tell Emma all about the day she was born during a siege in a mountain cabin. The day her mother refused to give up." He administered the shot, then grabbed her hand, pressing his fingers to her wrist to monitor her pulse. "Now fight, Zara. Fight with everything you have." Adrenaline surged through Zara's body like a wildfire. Her back arched, her eyes flew open as every nerve ignited at once. The cabin, which had been fading to gray, suddenly snapped into painful, sharp focus. Every detail was heightened, every sound amplified. "Deep breaths," Marcus instructed, monitoring her pulse with one hand while keeping the rifle trained on the door with the other. "Short, steady breaths. That's it." Her heart hammered against her ribs, but with the pain came focus. The fog of blood loss temporarily receded. "It's working," Marcus noted, checking the bleeding. "The uterus is contracting." Outside, a tense argument broke out between the assailants. The words were muffled, but the tone suggested disagreement. Finally, a voice shouted through the splintered door. "We'll wait till dawn. Gives you time to reconsider." Footsteps receded into the surrounding forest. Marcus remained vigilant, suspecting a trick, but after several minutes of no movement, he turned his full attention back to Zara. "They're regrouping," he said, applying a fresh compress. "Buying time." "Why would they wait?" Zara managed to ask between ragged breaths. "Tactical decision. The darkness favors the defender." He checked her pupils, nodding with satisfaction at her response. "How do you feel?" "Like I'm being electrocuted." A faint smile touched his lips. "That's a perfect description of adrenaline." As if on cue, the infant beside them began to cry, small, indignant wails that filled the cabin. Marcus gently scooped up the newborn, examining her with professional rigor before swaddling her in a makeshift blanket from a soft flannel shirt. "She's perfect," he declared, placing the baby in Zara's arms. "Strong lungs, good color, all reflexes intact." Zara gazed down at her daughter, momentarily forgetting her own pain. Emma's face was red and wrinkled with displeasure, her tiny fists flailing in protest against the cold, new world. "Hello, little one," Zara whispered. "You certainly made an entrance." As Zara bonded with her newborn, Marcus continued to manage her hemorrhage, applying steady pressure, administering further medication, and monitoring her vitals with meticulous attention. Gradually, the bleeding slowed to a manageable level. "The crisis is passing," he announced finally, relief evident beneath his clinical tone. "Your body is responding." The artificial energy from the adrenaline began to wane, leaving Zara exhausted but stable. Outside, the first hints of dawn were lightening the eastern sky. Marcus moved to each window, assessing the situation. "They're still out there," he reported. "At least 2 covered positions. Waiting. For reinforcements, maybe. Or just daylight." He returned to Zara's side, checking her temperature. "How's the pain?" "Manageable," she answered, adjusting Emma in her arms. "What's our plan?" The simple question held a world of trust. He gave a slight nod, accepting the partnership that circumstance had forged between them. "First priority is to get you both stabilized. Then we secure our position." He began gathering more medical supplies. "The bleeding's under control, but you need fluids, rest, antibiotics." As Marcus spoke, Emma's cries quieted as she found Zara's breast and began to nurse, an instinctive act of survival that left both adults watching in momentary awe. "Life finds a way," Marcus murmured, an uncharacteristic softness in his voice. He turned away, giving them a moment of privacy as he rigged a makeshift IV with his supplies. Zara watched his movements, precise, efficient, yet gentler than the rough exterior he presented to the world. "You could have been a doctor," she observed. "A real one, I mean." "Thought about it. After the injury," he replied, hanging the saline bag from a hook near the bed. "Even took some pre-med courses during rehab." "What happened?" "Bureaucracy. Red tape. Too many people telling me what I couldn't do." He inserted the IV needle with an expert's skill. "Here. You don't answer to anyone," Zara added with a small smile. "Except for pregnant hikers who drop in unannounced." For the first time, Marcus laughed. A short, rough bark of a sound, rusted from disuse. "Apparently so." The shared moment of levity vanished as the reality of their situation reasserted itself. Dawn was coming, pale light filtering through the cabin's windows. Soon, their attackers would make their move. Marcus moved to his storage compartment, retrieving several items Zara couldn't quite see. His movements were those of a man preparing for battle. Methodical, focused, honed by years of training. "Rest while you can," he advised, returning to his position near the door. "The hard part isn't over." Zara looked down at Emma, now sleeping peacefully on her chest. "I think the hardest part already is." Marcus followed her gaze, his expression softening once more. "She's a miracle," he acknowledged quietly. "Worth defending, at any cost." The simple statement was an admission, a promise, and a transformation. In the span of a few chaotic days, this solitary man had found something he thought he had lost forever. A purpose beyond mere survival. The morning sun illuminated the cabin's interior, revealing the aftermath of the night. Medical supplies were scattered across blood-stained linens, The shattered window was hastily boarded with plywood, and the splintered doorframe was braced with a heavy trunk. Marcus had been working silently for hours, alternating between fortifying their defenses and checking on Zara and Emma. "They're moving," he announced quietly, peering through a narrow gap in the window covering. Zara sat propped against the wall, Emma asleep in her arms. Though still weak from blood loss, her color had improved significantly. "How many?" "3 visible. Probably more in reserve." Marcus moved away from the window, picking up a hunting knife from his gear. The blade was well worn but razor sharp. "I found this on one of them yesterday." Zara recognized it, the knife that had been dropped during the attempted breach. "We can use it?" "Already did," he replied, showing her the fresh, deliberate notches he had carved into the handle. "I left it where they'd find it, with a message." "What message?" "That I know exactly who they are, and that I'm not alone." His expression was unreadable. "It might make them hesitate." Zara shifted Emma to her other arm, wincing at the movement. "You still haven't told me why they want you so badly." Marcus was silent for a long moment, weighing his answer. Finally, he went to the hidden compartment beneath the floorboards and retrieved a weatherproof case containing a small digital camera and memory cards. "5 years ago, I was scouting wilderness routes for an adaptive hiking program. Ways for people with disabilities to access remote areas." His voice was measured, factual. "I stumbled onto their operation. Young women being moved through these mountains on unmarked trails. Human trafficking?" He powered on the camera and showed Zara several long-distance photographs. Groups of people being led along remote ridges, armed guards flanking them. The faces were blurred by distance, but the situation was unmistakable. "I documented everything. Faces, locations, methods. I planned to turn it all over to the authorities once I had enough." His jaw tightened. "Then they spotted me, tracked me to the cabin. I barely got away." "Why didn't you go to the police right then?" "I tried. The local sheriff took the information. Nothing happened." His expression darkened. "Later, I found out he was on their payroll. By the time I realized, they were hunting me. So I disappeared into the mountains. Became the recluse everyone already thought I was." "And you've been hiding ever since," Zara finished for him. "Gathering evidence. Building a case that couldn't be buried." He put the camera away carefully. "I've spent 5 years tracking their movements from a distance, documenting patterns. The evidence is airtight now. Dates, locations, IDs, enough to bring down their entire network." "That's why they want you," Zara concluded. "Not just to silence a witness, but to get that evidence back. Which I've encrypted and stored in multiple locations," Marcus added. "If anything happens to me, it all goes straight to the feds." Movement outside caught his attention. One of the men stepped out from the tree line, walking openly toward the cabin. His hands raised to show they were empty. The notched hunting knife was visibly tucked into his belt. Marcus's message had been received. "He's coming to parley," Marcus observed. "Are you going to talk to him?" "I have to. We need to buy more time." He moved to the med kit and pulled a small pistol from where it had been hidden beneath the supplies. "Can you handle this?" Zara hesitated, her eyes flicking down to Emma. "I'm not asking you to shoot anyone," Marcus clarified. "Just to be ready if this goes wrong. Pointed at the door. If they breach, you pull the trigger." She took the weapon, its weight unfamiliar and unnerving in her hand. "I've never fired a gun before." "I hope you won't have to." He settled his rifle across his lap, facing the door. Stay out of sight. Keep Emma quiet, if you can. The man outside stopped at the edge of the porch, maintaining a respectful distance. A morning pause. Ready to talk now? Marcus unlocked the door but remained inside, the shotgun visible but not aimed. There's nothing to talk about, Barton. You know what happens to the evidence if I miss my check-in calls. The man, Barton, offered a faint, knowing smile. Ever the strategist. But circumstances have changed. He nodded toward the cabin's interior. You have responsibilities now. People who depend on you. Marcus's expression remained a stone mask, but Sarah could see the slight tightening in his shoulders, the telltale sign of a man calculating odds, weighing his options. Here's my offer, Barton continued. You give us the evidence, all of it, and we leave the woman and child unharmed. You too, if you want. We're businessmen, Holt, not monsters. Businessmen who traffic in human lives. Barton shrugged. Just meeting a market demand. Nothing personal. His gaze hardened. This is a one-time offer. Think it over. That baby deserves a chance to grow up without this unspoken threat hanging over her. He turned and walked unhurriedly back toward the trees. Marcus shut and bolted the door, his face grim. What are you going to do? Sarah asked, her voice a whisper. Not what he expects, Marcus replied, already moving with a renewed purpose. It's time we changed the rules of engagement. Marcus moved with a focused intensity, gathering supplies and checking his weapons. His face had taken on the grim focus of a soldier preparing for battle. We can't stay here, he said, pulling a worn map from a loose floorboard. The cabin is compromised. Too easy to surround. Too hard to defend, especially with your condition and the baby. He spread the map on the table, revealing a surface covered in handwritten annotations and routes that wouldn't appear on any official survey. Sarah watched as his finger traced a thin line, snaking through the most remote sections of the mountain range. There's a ranger station here. He indicated a point nearly 7 miles from their position. Seasonal, but it's equipped with emergency comms, solar-powered satellite link. Sarah glanced at Emma, who was nursing peacefully, blissfully unaware of the danger closing in around them. I can barely walk across the room. We don't have a choice. Marcus's voice was gentle but firm. Their offer to negotiate was a stalling tactic. More men are on their way. I counted 2 more sets of tracks this morning. By nightfall, they'll have the numbers to storm the cabin, regardless of our defenses. Sarah knew he was right, but the prospect of a journey through the wilderness with a newborn, in her own weakened state, felt impossible. How are we supposed to do that? You're in a wheelchair. I'm still recovering from childbirth. Marcus rolled to a storage space under the bed and pulled out a modified pack with a complex system of harnesses and straps. This is how I handle the trails. My upper body strength is enough for the rough terrain. I've mapped every possible route within a 20-mile radius of this cabin. He continued his preparations, assembling medical supplies, food, and water purification gear. Each item was selected with precision, a balance of necessity and weight. Your strength will come back faster than you think, he added. The body responds in a survival situation. Adrenaline will compensate for the weakness. And Emma? Sarah asked. In response, Marcus produced a small sling, fashioned from canvas and padding, improvised, but secure. She'll travel against chest. Stay warm from your body heat. Despite her fear, Sarah felt a flicker of hope as she watched his methodical preparations. This man had survived the impossible before. His confidence was infectious. When do we leave? At dusk. The low visibility will work in our favor. They'll expect a move at dawn. He pointed to another section of the map. There's a creek bed here. It'll mask our sound and scent. We follow it for 4 miles, then cut across this ridge. Marcus continued to outline the route, pointing out potential hazards and alternate paths. Sarah tried to absorb it all, the reality of placing her life, and Emma's, in his hands, sinking in. You've really memorized every inch of these mountains, haven't you? He nodded. I had to. My survival depended on knowing what was accessible, what wasn't, where to hide, how to move without being seen. Sarah studied him, this man who had turned his disability into a strength, his isolation into self-reliance. You're remarkable, you know that? Marcus looked up, clearly uncomfortable with the praise. I just adapted. Anyone would have. No, Sarah said firmly. Not just anyone. Most would have given up. He returned to his preparations without another word. But something in his posture had shifted, a subtle easing of the perpetual tension he carried. As the afternoon waned, Marcus instructed Sarah on the final preparations, how to dress in layers, how to move silently through the undergrowth, and the emergency protocols should they become separated. She absorbed every word with a determined focus, finding a strength she didn't know she possessed. One more thing, Marcus said, producing a small satellite beacon from his supplies. Military-grade emergency transmitter. If all else fails, you activate this. It's registered to my service record. It'll bring an immediate response. Why haven't you used this before? Because it's a one-shot device, and because, until now, I didn't want to be found. He handed the device to her. Keep it safe. She understood the implication. This device was Marcus's final failsafe, preserved through years of isolation, now entrusted to her. I won't activate it unless it's absolutely necessary, she promised. Marcus gave a single, satisfied nod. Rest now while you can. We move in 3 hours. While Sarah dozed with Emma beside her, Marcus made the final arrangements. He transferred the digital evidence to a waterproof hard drive, stowing it in a hidden inner pocket. Then, he wrote swiftly in his journal, detailing observations, coordinates, and contingency instructions, years of tactical planning, distilled into emergency protocols. When he was done, he tore the pages out and placed them in Sarah's pack where she would find them if needed. An insurance policy against the worst-case scenario. Outside, the shadows lengthened as evening approached. Through the window, Marcus could see their pursuers holding their position at the forest's edge, patient, confident in their superior numbers and firepower, waiting for a confrontation that would never come. This isn't how this ends, Marcus muttered to himself, making a final adjustment to his all-terrain wheelchair. Not today. Dusk draped the mountains in a protective cloak, bringing with it deeper shadows and the first stirrings of nocturnal life. Inside the cabin, Sarah settled Emma into the improvised carrier, the newborn swaddled securely against her chest. The baby had been fed, changed, and mercifully remained asleep, as if sensing the need for silence. Ready? Marcus whispered, making a final check of his modified chair. Sarah nodded, her face pale but determined. She had braided her hair tightly, dressed in the instructed layers, and carried only the essential supplies in a small pack. Marcus moved to a corner of the cabin that looked ordinary but concealed their escape route, a narrow entrance to a tunnel built into the foundation, hidden behind a removable section of the wall. The original cabin had a root cellar, he explained, pulling the panel free. I expanded it. An insurance policy for this exact scenario. The passage was tight, but navigable. Marcus went first, transferring from his chair to a low, wheeled platform he'd built specifically for the tunnel. Sarah followed, hunched over to protect Emma, her movements slow but steadier than either of them had expected. They emerged 50 yards from the cabin, concealed by a natural depression and dense undergrowth. From this vantage point, they could see two men watching the cabin's front entrance, oblivious to their quarry's escape. Marcus retrieved a folded wheelchair he'd stashed at the tunnel's exit. It was a lightweight, all-terrain model with large, knobby tires and a reinforced frame. The engineering was impressive, every component designed for silent movement over rough ground. I used to design mobility equipment, he whispered, transferring himself with practiced efficiency. This prototype never made it to production. They moved cautiously into the growing darkness, Marcus leading the way, picking each path with tactical precision. When the terrain became too rugged for the wheels, he transitioned to a modified crawl, using his immense upper body strength to pull himself forward, while special braces protected his legs. Sarah followed, awestruck by his seamless adaptation to the wilderness. What would have been an impassable obstacle for most was merely another challenge he had long since solved with ingenuity and grit. They reached the creek bed Marcus had identified. The water was low enough to provide a natural path, while its gentle murmuring masked their sounds. Cold water numbed Sarah's feet, but she welcomed the sensation, using it to stay alert against the pull of exhaustion. Emma stirred occasionally, but remained remarkably quiet, soothed by the proximity of her mother's heartbeat and the steady rhythm of their progress. When they paused for Sarah to rest, Marcus examined the child with a professional thoroughness, nodding in approval at her stable condition. She's incredibly resilient, he observed. Good sign, Sarah replied without thinking. She takes after her godfather. Marcus looked up sharply, something vulnerable flickering across his face before it vanished behind his usual reserve. He said nothing, but briefly touched Emma's tiny hand before returning to his navigational calculations. They continued through the night, their progress slower than planned, but steady. Twice they detected distant voices and the slicing beams of flashlights, but Marcus's intimate knowledge of the terrain allowed them to evade detection both times. Dawn found them at the base of a steep ridge, the most challenging leg of their journey. Above them loomed a near-vertical rock face, seemingly impossible for anyone in Marcus's condition. We'll rest here, he decided, gesturing to a sheltered overhang. We need daylight for the next part. Sarah sank to the ground, grateful as her muscles trembled with fatigue. She gently lifted Emma from the carrier, cradling her as Marcus prepared a modest but sustaining meal from their rations. How are we going to manage that? She asked, nodding toward the imposing cliff face. Marcus followed her gaze. There's a route, less vertical than it looks from this angle. I've done it before with the chair. He paused, his expression unreadable. But this part requires a different technique. He removed his leg braces, setting them aside, and pulled specialized climbing gear from his pack. Modified harnesses, hand ascenders, and compact pulleys. The system was ingenious, designed to maximize upper body strength while protecting his lower body. You're going to climb that? Sarah couldn't hide the disbelief in her voice. We both are. He began fitting a harness for her. I'll go first. Set the anchors. You'll follow with Emma. The matter-of-fact way he laid out this seemingly impossible plan left no room for argument. Sarah watched him ready the equipment with an absolute confidence, wondering, not for the first time, what forces had forged this extraordinary man. "Marcus," she said softly, "if we don't make it, we will," he cut in, his eyes meeting hers directly. "Trust the plan, trust your strength, and trust me." Something almost like a smile touched his lips. 7 years in these mountains. They haven't failed me yet. The simple statement held so much: pride without arrogance, confidence born of necessity, the quiet dignity of a man who had rebuilt himself in the wilderness. As they rested, Emma woke, demanding attention. Sarah fed her while Marcus stood watch, his vigilance never wavering, despite his own fatigue. "They're still on our tail," he observed, spotting a distant movement through a compact monocular. "But they've lost the trail. They took the wrong ridge." "We're ahead of them," Sarah said, hope seeping through her weariness. "For now, we can't afford to waste it." Marcus returned to his preparations, his fingers moving with expert precision over carabiners and rope. "2 more hours, then we climb." The ranger station appeared through the trees like a mirage, its weathered clapboard siding glowing in the late afternoon sun. The sight nearly brought Sarah to tears. After 2 days of grueling travel, countless near misses with their pursuers, and the ever-present needs of a newborn, civilization had never looked so beautiful. Marcus scanned the small clearing with tactical precision. No vehicles. The station's seasonal, unmanned for another month. "But you said there was communications gear," Sarah reminded him. "A self-powered emergency satellite system." He shifted in the wheelchair, its frame battered from the harrowing climb up the ridge. "We need to move fast. They're still on our tail." They approached the ranger station with caution. The door was locked, but it was no match for Marcos's practiced hands and the simple tools from his pack. Inside, the air was stale, the space spartan but functional. A single desk held a radio console, flanked by shelves of emergency supplies and a small generator. Marcos went straight to the comms panel, his movements economical and swift as he powered it up. A flicker of green light. "Backup batteries still holding a charge," he noted, a hint of relief in his voice. As Marcos worked to raise the authorities, Sarah tended to Emma. The little girl had been remarkably resilient, but the sudden stop and the tense quiet of the station were making her fussy. "It's all right, little one," Sarah soothed, rocking her gently. "We made it. We're safe now." "Not yet," Marcos cautioned, his eyes still on the radio. "Help is on the way, but they're dispatching a chopper from regional command. Best case, 2 hours." A sound from outside froze them, the distinct crunch of boots on gravel. In a fluid, silent motion, Marcos killed the lights and flattened himself against the wall beside the window. "They picked up our tracks," he whispered, his voice devoid of surprise. "2 of them. Barton and one other." Sarah clutched Emma tighter, her own heart hammering against her ribs. "After all this, we can't lose now." "We won't," Marcos said, his voice a low, certain thing. He reached into his pack, pulling out a small, metallic device she'd never seen before. "Insurance policy. Been saving it for a rainy day." Through the grimy window pane, she watched the men advance, a mix of caution and confidence in their posture, weapons held at a low ready. Barton gestured for his partner to circle around to the back. "No more running." Barton's voice cut through the quiet. "Game's over. Come on out. Bring the evidence. Maybe we'll let the woman and the kid walk." Marcos ignored him, his focus entirely on the device. A remote trigger of some kind. He caught Sarah's questioning gaze. Perimeter alarm from my old cabin. A faint, wry smile touched his lips. Modified it years ago. It's not just an alarm anymore. It's a signal booster. The evidence? Sarah breathed. Marcos nodded. Just broadcast to every law enforcement agency in range, along with our GPS coordinates and a distress call. The door crashed open. Barton filled the doorway, rifle raised. Hands where I can see them. Marcos raised his hands with deliberate slowness. Sarah turned, shielding Emma with her own body, bracing for the inevitable. The evidence is gone, Barton, Marcos said, his voice calm. It's been broadcast. It's over. You're lying. But a flicker of uncertainty crossed Barton's face. Check your comms. Marcos nodded toward the device on Barton's belt. It should be lighting up right about now. Every agency within a 100-mile radius just received the complete file on your little operation. Faces, dates, locations, everything. As if on cue, the device on Barton's belt began to buzz, its screen flashing with incoming alerts. His expression hardened, the doubt curdling into pure rage. You're dead, all of you. The distant thump, thump, thump of rotors sliced through the tension. Barton's head snapped up, his eyes wide. Tactical response team, Marcos said conversationally. 4 minutes out, by the sound of it. For a long, suspended moment, Barton's finger tightened on the trigger, rage warring with self-preservation. Then, with a snarled curse, he scrambled back through the door. This isn't over! Oh, yes, it is, Marcos replied, his voice flat and final. Barton vanished into the trees, shouting for his partner. The sound of the helicopter grew deafening, its searchlight already cutting swaths across the nearby hills. Marcos turned to Sarah, his hands gentle as he checked on Emma. You two all right? Sarah could only nod. The relief so immense it brought tears streaming down her face. This is because of you. He looked away, uncomfortable with the raw gratitude in her voice. You did the hard part. You kept her safe. We did it together, she corrected, her hand finding his. He hesitated for a heartbeat. Then his fingers closed around hers. They sat in a shared silence as the helicopter circled above, its spotlight flooding the clearing, a beacon of safety descending from the night sky. 3 months later, Sarah stood on the porch of a small, newly built cabin. Different location, same mountains. This one, however, was accessible by a winding road, with wider doorways and ramps integrated seamlessly into its design. Inside, Marcos sat with Emma in his lap, quietly reading from a nature guide. The toddler gazed up at him with absolute trust, her tiny fingers curled around the cabin key he was letting her use as a makeshift toy, a symbol of the place that had changed all their lives. Ready? Sarah called out. Marcos looked up, the ever-present caution in his expression replaced by something new, something that looked like peace. Ready, he answered, and moved to join her in the sunlight. She stopped him with a sharp intake of breath. Her hand flew to her swollen belly as a powerful wave of pressure seized her, stealing her breath. Marcos was at her side in an instant, his eyes on his watch. That's one, he said, his voice calm. Let's start timing them. He worked methodically, transforming a corner of the cabin into a birthing area. Clean sheets on the bed, medical instruments sterilized in boiling water. Improvised stirrups made from clean rope and cushions. Each movement was efficient, with no wasted energy, no panic. Sarah watched him through rising waves of discomfort. You've really done this before? Twice in Afghanistan, once in South Sudan. He positioned lanterns for the best light. Not ideal conditions, but we'll manage. Another contraction hit, harder than the first. Sarah breathed through it, calling on the techniques from her birthing classes. Marcos noted the time. 12 minutes since the last one. Still early. First babies usually take their time. He arranged pillows to support her back. Try to rest between them. Conserve your strength. What about the men outside? Marcos's expression tightened for a fraction of a second. That was a secondary concern now. This cabin's 40 years old. Solid construction. The entrance is defensible. The clinical assessment was strangely reassuring. Sarah nodded, then winced as another contraction began to build. 8 minutes, Marcos noted, a hint of surprise in his voice. Moving faster now, he went to the stove and returned with a cup of herbal tea. Red raspberry leaf. Helps with labor. Sarah took it gratefully. You just had that lying around? It's good for a number of medicinal purposes. A faint smile touched his lips. Though I'll admit, obstetric supplies weren't my first priority when I stalked this place. The next few hours passed in a blur of escalating intensity. Marcos transformed before her eyes, the gruff recluse replaced by a focused, competent medic. He checked her progress regularly, his clinical detachment making the intimate examinations less awkward than they might have been. 6 centimeters, he reported. Good progress. By nightfall, the contractions were coming every 3 minutes. Sarah gripped the edge of the bed, sweat plastering her hair to her forehead. I don't know if I can do this. You are doing it. His voice was steady, an anchor in the storm of pain. Your body knows what to do. Trust it. A sound outside drew his attention to the window. Dusk had fallen, and with it came the sound of movement in the undergrowth, too deliberate for wildlife. They're back, Sarah whispered between contractions. Marcos moved to the window, peering out cautiously. One man, on watch. He retrieved his rifle, placing it nearby but out of sight of the windows. Then he was back at her side, coaching her through another contraction, as if there had been no interruption. Deep breaths. That's it. The contractions intensified again, now only a minute apart. Sarah cried out, unable to hold back the sound. I need to push. Marcos examined her again. Not yet. Almost. Breathe through the urge to push. The noise outside stopped abruptly. Marcos tensed, listening. They heard you. I can't be quiet, Sarah gasped, as another contraction peaked. Don't try. He moved to position himself between the bed and the door, within reach of both Sarah and his weapon. Let them hear. It might even work in our favor. How? She managed to ask between breaths. Few things are more terrifying than a woman in labor, Marcos said, the faint smile returning. Even hardened men tend to keep their distance. As if in answer, the footsteps outside retreated toward the tree line. Marcos nodded in satisfaction. See? Tactical advantage. Sarah would have laughed if another contraction hadn't seized her. This one was different. An undeniable, overwhelming urge to bear down. Marcos, she panted. It's time. He checked her one last time, then nodded, all trace of humor gone. You're right. 10 centimeters. On the next one, I want you to push. Outside, the darkness was complete. The watcher had retreated, but Marcos knew they hadn't gone far. Inside, a new life was about to begin. Two forces, creation and threat, converged on this small cabin in the middle of nowhere. Ready? Marcos asked, positioning himself to guide the baby's arrival. Sarah nodded, gathering her strength as the next contraction began to swell. Push, he instructed calmly. Bring your child into the world. The sound of shattering glass tore through the concentrated intensity of the room. Marcos's head snapped toward the back window, where a gloved hand was now reaching through a jagged hole, fumbling for the lock. Sarah, keep pushing, he commanded, his voice betraying none of the urgency of his movements as he propelled his chair toward the intruder. With remarkable upper body strength, Marcos launched himself from the chair, using the momentum to seize the intruding arm and twist it viciously. A cry of pain erupted from outside as he slammed the man's arm against the window frame, forcing his fingers to release a hunting knife that clattered to the floor. Sarah cried out with another contraction, her focus torn between the demands of her body and the struggle at the window. "I'm here!" Marcos called to her, maintaining his grip on the intruder while reaching for the rifle with his free hand. "Keep going. You're doing great." The intruder wrenched his arm free, disappearing from the broken window. Marcos quickly wedged a metal toolbox into the opening, then returned to Sarah's side, rifle across his lap. "That was impressive," Sarah gasped. "Combat training. Upper body strength compensates." He repositioned himself to assist her, while keeping a clear line of sight to all points of entry. "Focus on pushing now." Muffled voices murmured outside, several of them. The intruder hadn't come alone. "How many?" Sarah asked, gritting her teeth as another wave crested. "3, maybe 4. Marcos's voice remained steady. "Don't worry about them." "Hard not to," she managed, pushing with the contraction. "They're not getting in." His certainty was a comfort. "Not while I'm here." The baby's head began to crown. "I can see her," Marcos announced, his professional detachment momentarily broken by awe. "One more big push, Sarah.